Okay, I'm back. Sorry, folks. I've been out of town all week, giving a seminar to a group of docs in New Mexico, and I left my phone. So here we go. I got it back, so now I can see who I'm talking to, and I can get your questions answered for you. So, and again, if you're new to Dr. Osborne's show, type in your questions early. I do my best to get as many of them answered as I can during the show time, but I try to take them first come, first serve. So before we dive in, looks like we've got lots of people tuning in. We got Wendy from Scotland and Donna from Oklahoma and Sammy from Waco, Texas, Stephanie from Ishpeming, Michigan. I've never heard of that town. Ishpeming, sorry. Tracy from NOLA tuning in, and Len from South Australia, Chris from Colorado. Again, keep tuning in, keep chiming in, let me know where you're from, and we'll dive into the topic tonight of natural solutions for heart disease. So this is a big topic because, some would argue that heart disease, battles between cancer, heart disease and cancer are the top one and top two causes of death in the United States, even though I would argue that autoimmune disease trumps them both, which is why I focus so much time on autoimmune disease. But we'll dive into that. We'll definitely dive into heart disease as an autoimmune disease tonight, which I think is important for you to understand. So we got Deandra chiming in from California. They go to see my buddy Tom Bakeman. That's awesome, Deandra. Thanks for tuning in. We got Gabriella from Peru, and we got Amanda chiming in. We got let's see, Barbara, where are you from? We got Nancy Simon. Nancy, where are you from? So again, the rule's very simple. Tell me where you're from. Nancy's from Northern Michigan. Love it. Okay, Christina from California. We got Peggy from Redondo Beach. Chuck from California. Shirley from Albany, Oregon. All right, keep feeding me, folks. So let's dive in. Natural solutions for heart disease. Now, before I get deep into the solutions, I want to talk about some of the problems. So let's set the stage for some of the problems. So if we look at heart disease, and we talk about what are the actual risk factors. And if you ask anybody, what are the risk factors associated with an increased risk in developing heart disease first and foremost, I think it's important to understand these. So some of the bigger risk factors: weight gain, obesity. And it's not just obesity, because you can be skinny fat, you can be thin and have central fat around your heart and around your organs and not be overweight. So we should be saying obesity, but we really should be saying poor muscle mass. So poor muscle mass is a huge risk factor. Of course, there are the obvious risk factors. Gender is one. So if you're male, you have a greater risk, although not by much. Smoking is certainly a risk factor involved in heart disease. We've got alcohol is a risk factor. We've got sedentary behaviors or sedentary lifestyle is a risk factor. And of course, one of the bigger risk factors, and I'm just going to put it up at the top, is diet. And this has been very, very well established through what are called the DASH studies. DASH stands for Dietary Approaches to Stop Hypertension. I talked about that a few months ago, but diet is probably and arguably one of the biggest factors because diet affects every single one of these except for smoking, except for gender, right? But everything else is diet related because people that tend to be sedentary are people that tend to be more overweight because their joints hurt, and so they avoid exercise because of chronic pain as a result of chronic inflammation caused by the diet. But if we really look at the biggest risk factor beyond diet, beyond all these things, what is the common underlying theme? It's inflammation. Inflammation is the common underlying theme. So the reason I bring this up is because we really want to focus and hone in right here on this. If we can figure out where the inflammation is coming from, then we can stop and mitigate the risk. But if we can't figure this part out, then we're not really mitigating the risk. We're moving around the world with false sense of security. And the reason I say that is because when you go to a cardiologist, when you go to a traditional doctor, they're going to add some additional risk factors here. So if we want to draw another one of them is high blood pressure. So I'm going to abbreviate hypertension, HTN. I'm abbreviating as hypertension. So if you have high blood pressure, another one of them that they're going to tell you about is elevations in cholesterol. And so the predominant approach in cardiovascular medicine today to lower the risk of developing heart disease is to reduce blood pressure and then to reduce cholesterol through drugs. So chemical manipulation of blood pressure and cholesterol. And then most doctors will tell you you need to lose weight. Most doctors will tell you that you need to exercise. But that's it's kind of a kiss and a promise tell. You're like, okay, eat right and exercise, and out the door you go with a couple of different prescriptions for things that will control your blood pressure and that will lower your cholesterol. So I want to be very clear. High blood pressure is definitely a risk factor, but what causes high blood pressure is really what we want to know. And a deficiency in medicine doesn't cause high blood pressure. A deficiency in medicine doesn't cause high cholesterol. So we want to know what is creating these two scenarios as risk factors, and not necessarily let's just lower them artificially and let you continue to make the same types of mistakes that you are making to contribute to this right here, this inflammation. Because if we look at the history of heart disease, really prior to the early 1900s, prior to 1910, before the mainstream use of margarine, cardiovascular disease was not real rampant. It wasn't like the number one cause of disease. It was way down on the totem pole. So it only really became a major force of death in the United States as more processed foods came online. So we had margarine come in first, and then we've had a whole plethora of chemicals and artificial food additives and food dyes and food preservatives and chemicals like pesticides and other things that we know absolutely beyond the shadow of a doubt create inflammation. But a couple of other things have happened in the last 100 years that really, I think, have contributed to this. And so we really could add some risk factors here. Obesity being a risk factor, but what causes poor muscle mass and obesity is sedentary lifestyle. And so we look here, this is computers, right? This is sitting at a desk job. In the early 1900s, 90% of the population lived in rural areas and had labor type jobs where a lot of people working, being physically active in their labor and doing their work. Today we don't have that. We have most people that sit for 8 to 10 hours a day in front of a computer screen and don't do much getting up, don't do much exercise. So we've got, we could say that another risk factor for heart disease, aside from being sedentary, is just our workforce, the way our workforce is promoted. Now, on that note, one of the things I can recommend in this regard, if we're talking about a solution, is put a treadmill under your desk. Get you a walking treadmill. If you have a desk job where you're required to be there 8 some odd hours a day, then consider getting a treadmill or some type of standing desk where you have movement and motion as part of your normal course of your day, so that you don't atrophy away sitting at a desk for the rest of your life. So again, these are the risk factors. So these things all combined are either caused by inflammation or caused by choice or caused by behavior or create inflammation. So like diet creates inflammation. Obesity is a form of inflammation. Poor muscle mass leads to increased inflammation. Smoking causes inflammation. Alcohol causes inflammation. Sedentary lifestyle causes poor muscle mass, which contributes to inflammation. High blood pressure is caused by inflammation. And again, this is what I want you to understand. The inflammation causes the high blood pressure. So if we treat the high blood pressure with drugs, we're not really addressing the source of where the heart disease comes from, and that's part of the problem. I think that's why so many people go on with their medicines and they still die of heart disease. They still have problems with heart disease deaths. And again, if we argue about medical statistics, heart disease is number one cause of death. Heart disease and cancer are kind of right up there together at 1 million deaths per year. And if we have such wonderful drugs that actually treat the reason for the heart disease, then why do we still have 1 million people a year dying from it? I think that fundamentally is the intelligent question to ask. So any of you that are listening that consider yourself to be an intelligent, inquisitive person, this is the question. This is the conversation that I encourage you to have with your doctor if this is what the approach is. Because again, if your doctor didn't sit down and teach you about diet, about nutrition, and about exercise, but they just told you to do more of it, what does that really mean? Because specificity within diet is very important, because one of the big factors involved in if we want to put another risk factor on the board, it's a sub-risk factor of diet, is gluten. And in the medical literature, gluten or celiac disease is a big contributing factor to heart disease. As a matter of fact, some people never have gut problems. They simply develop autoimmune heart disease. I've got an article published for you, is from 2008, talking about autoimmune disease, talking about heart disease as a form of autoimmunity. And this is where gluten comes in, because gluten is one of the predominant triggers for autoimmune disease. And so many people go around eating gluten and creating inflammation around their heart, inflammation in their heart, leading to that problem. And was the premise, or one of the premises for the book, for the cardiologist Dr. William Davis in his book Wheat Belly wrote about, was that gluten is one of the major contributing factors to heart disease in the United States and in industrialized worlds today. So you've got to keep that in mind. So now that we kind of have set the stage for, what are the risk factors, this is easy. We can do, okay, what are the solutions? Checklist, right? Okay. Can't control this. I don't care how many people are out there changing their gender. You can't control your biological gender. Number 2, smoking. You can change that. There's control over that. If you smoke, obviously, you want to reduce your risk. You got to quit smoking. You can control alcohol intake. You can control obesity and sedentary lifestyle through choice, right? Exercise being predominant answer in that regard. And you can control diet. So the big factors that lead to the most inflammation are 100% controllable. What you can't control is your gender and your race. And some would even add down here, they'd say that race is an important factor in heart disease, because African American population has a greater risk for developing heart disease. And a lot of that has to do from vitamin D deficiency. It's harder for African Americans to produce vitamin D when exposed to the sunshine than it is for Caucasian. And vitamin D deficiency is known directly to create inflammation that is tied to heart disease. So there's your correlation for you in that regard. So although you can't control your race, you can control your supplementation, and you can control asking your doctor to order vitamin D. So again, we have this kind of scenario where we know what the risk factors are. So now I want to talk a little bit. Let me make some room here, because there are a couple of things that I want you to walk away from this understanding. So that was the risk factors. So now let's talk about a little bit more in depth about the medication. Okay. If you are taking cholesterol meds, understand that the side effects can lead to heart disease. So one of the side effects to taking cholesterol medicines for long periods of time is that they cause a CoQ10 deficiency. Now CoQ10 or coenzyme Q10 is like a B vitamin. Not technically a B vitamin, but it's like a B vitamin. It's important for energy. And CoQ10 deficiency leads to congestive heart failure, hypertension or high blood pressure, muscle weakness, and it's been linked to dementia. So you start losing your memory, losing your mind. Think of brain fog, think of mental fatigue, those types of things. So CoQ10 deficiency comes long-term with a plethora of different potential problems, including 2 forms of heart disease, congestive heart failure and hypertension. So again, if I'm giving, as a doctor, if a doctor's giving you this drug that blocks cholesterol, but causing a CoQ10 deficiency that can lead to congestive heart failure and high blood pressure, does that make sense? Let's just think through this logically. So how many of you, what I'd like to know, I'm going to poll the audience here, how many of you have ever, if you've been prescribed a statin, like a cholesterol-lowering drug, if your doctor had a conversation with you about CoQ10? I would like to know how many of you who are on those medicines have had a conversation, how many haven't. So if your doctor prescribed you a statin and also told you to take CoQ10, type in yes, CoQ10. If your doctor didn't have this conversation, type in no CoQ10, and let's see the results of that poll here shortly. Now, so this is one of the side effects of cholesterol medication. Let's talk about one of the other ones. These medicines can also create problems with vitamin D. So now we have deficiency in vitamin D. Now, vitamin D deficiency has been linked to heart disease, but it's also been linked to autoimmune disease. And it's also directly linked to 19 different forms of cancer. So we've got a vitamin D deficiency that can cause heart disease, can cause autoimmune disease, but can also cause cancer. Now, many would argue that heart disease is autoimmune disease. So, these two can kind of go hand in hand, although there are more autoimmune diseases than just the ones that affect the heart. For example, if you've been diagnosed with pericarditis of an unknown origin, it's one of 2 possibilities. typically it's either an infection or it's an autoimmune type of pericarditis. So understand that the more and more research that's being done on heart disease, the more and more we're finding that it actually is a form of autoimmune disease. So vitamin D deficiency is another problem with cholesterol medicines. And again, the outcome of vitamin D deficiency is it contributes to heart disease. Okay, then we have the blocking of sex steroids. So taking a statin long term, remember that cholesterol is oftentimes referred to as the mother steroid. You need cholesterol to make, men, you need it to make testosterone. Women, you need it to make estrogen and progesterone. So think about this for a minute. We've been using these medicines, the statins, we've been using them now since 1987. So they've been around quite a long time at this point, over 30 years. And what have we seen popping up? We've been seeing this pop up, low T, low testosterone centers everywhere, popping up on every corner. What else do we see? We see a mass quantity of docs prescribing hormones, estrogens, progesterones. Like, this is a rampant component of our society. And I'm not, I'm not saying that the only reason that sex steroids being low is caused by statins. There are other reasons, there are other roles that play, or other things that play a role in that. But it's interesting that we've seen a lot more low testosterone, we've seen a lot more hormone problems since the 1987 advent or beginning of the approval of statin medications. So again, when you lower testosterone, when you have hormonal abnormalities, what does that do? That increases your risk of heart disease. So I say all this just simply to say, many of you may be taking a statin medication. Many of you may be taking medicines to lower your cholesterol. But I want you to understand that cholesterol doesn't cause heart disease. And lowering cholesterol artificially arguably does through these different mechanisms. So again, what I'm trying to help you understand is we're trying natural solutions. Understanding this is a solution because it allows you to go have an intelligent conversation with that prescribing doctor and have this conversation and discuss this, right? And there's lots of research on this. None of this is anecdotal. This is very, very research driven, this topic. We've been knowing about CoQ10 since before 1987, when statins were originally researched and studied. Merck, one of the companies that created one of the statins, actually patented a version of the statin with CoQ10 in it because it knew of the problem even before it came to market. And so again, that CoQ10 piece is very, very critical, and it's been around and we've known about it for a really long time. So bottom line, if you're on something to block your cholesterol, it's very, very important that you understand the outcome long term is that nutritional deficiency and that steroid dysregulation, which can actually increase your risk for developing heart disease, which is the very, very thing that you're trying to prevent. Remember, the whole purpose of a statin is that it lowers the risk, according to the doctors and according to the pharmacy industry. Taking a statin lowers your risk of developing heart disease, but as I just showed you, it actually increases your risk in other ways. So let's talk about something here. I'm going to draw you a picture. This is a blood vessel. We got the blood flow coming through the blood vessel. So blood flowing, and if we look at cholesterol, generally speaking, HDL, and again, forgive my diagrams, I'm not an artist. This is not designed to look professional, like a professional image. It's just designed to try to get you to understand the concept. But HDLs are large and they're buoyant, and generally as cholesterol goes, they float in the middle of the bloodstream, or the middle of the bloodstream, the blood vessel. So they don't tend to float near the periphery. But then we have smaller LDLs, and they come in different sizes. They're different LDLs. LDL is not one thing, it's multiple different fractions or subfractions. But generally speaking, you have type A, you've got type A LDL, you've got type I LDL, and you've got type B LDL. So again, generally speaking, we can break it down into different concepts. But what happens is even this small cholesterol is not really the cause of heart disease, or cardiovascular disease, because what we're talking about here, this is a blood vessel, right? So cardiovascular. What happens is an event, something that creates inflammation. So we get this inflammatory event, and whether that was food or whether that was some kind of a toxin chemical that you ingested, like a lead. We know lead and mercury can do this. We know that different foods can do this. We know that different agents or different elements within processed foods can do this. We know that hydrogenated fats can do this. So there are just a number of different things that can create inflammation. So once that inflammation occurs, these smaller LDLs, they see that inflammation and they're almost like little fire trucks. As they come over here and they start laying down little plaques to try to put out the fire. Again, and I'm oversimplifying this, but because the biology is a lot more complicated, but understand that over time they lay down plaques, and this is when doctors say your arteries are getting more and more clogged. This is what they're referring to, and they're blaming cholesterol for clogging the artery. But cholesterol is just trying to help put out the fire. The inflammation is what's actually to blame. So if we figure out what's happening here, we don't need to worry so much about lowering the cholesterol, because the real risk in deaths that come from heart disease happen, okay, when you have a big enough clot break off and traverse, and it gets stuck in a smaller blood vessel where it inhibits blood flow. So very simply put, this clot breaks off, clogs in an artery. If it's in your widowmaker, you have a heart attack. If it's in your brain, they call it they call it a stroke, and if it's in your lung, they call it an infarction. It's named based on the real estate, based on the location. So again, what's causing the inflammation? If we block the cholesterol, but we don't ask where the inflammation is coming from, we're not really going to solve this issue. We're just going to reduce your cholesterol and pay the side effect cost of reducing it, which is lower hormones, lower vitamin D, lower CoQ10. And so now you're going to pay, the longer you're doing this, the more of a nutritional price you're going to pay by blocking that cholesterol formation. So that, I want you to understand this very, very clearly, is that we need to get to the root cause of the inflammation. And in my experience, there are 4 primary causes of inflammation in people. And one of them is food. One of them is chemical exposures, things like pesticides, heavy metals, food dyes, food preservatives, food additives. Another big cause or contributing factor to inflammation is infection, so like a bacterial or a viral infection. And then a fourth is nutritional deficiency, vitamin and mineral deficiency, because vitamins and minerals and nutrients regulate inflammation, and having a deficiency can contribute to more inflammation. Now, there are stress factors as well, because stress is linked to heart disease, and we know that too much stress, chronic stress, emotional stress, physical stress, or chemical stress, either one, can increase your cortisol levels, and cortisol tells you to lose muscle and to store fat around your heart, and to store fat in your liver, and to store fat around your abdomen, and that certainly is an increased risk factor as well. So stress is just as, we'll put stress in as the 5th factor. I'll say more specifically emotional stress, because all those other 4 things I listed are forms of stress. They're forms of chemical stress, right? So here we've talked about cholesterol. I wanted you to have that information walking away from this conversation tonight. But now I want to talk about high blood pressure, because this is another topic. Many of you are on blood pressure medications to reduce your risk of developing a death from heart disease. So if you're on blood pressure meds, then what I want you to understand is the side effects. For many, the side effects is that we get a reduction of zinc, CoQ10, magnesium, potassium. Some blood pressure medications cause a deficiency of B vitamins, particularly vitamin B1. And so if we look at each of these different individual nutrients and ask the question, what are the side effects when we have a deficiency of these different nutrients? Well, zinc deficiency, side effect, poor healing, slow healing, increased risk for infection, easy bruising, your blood vessels break easier. Zinc's very important for forming collagen around your blood vessels. CoQ10 deficiency causes high blood pressure, congestive heart failure. Magnesium deficiency causes your blood thickness to increase, which has a feedback loop, making your heart have to work harder to pump your blood, because if your blood's too thick because of a magnesium deficiency, your heart has to work harder, and when your heart has to work harder, your blood pressure goes up. Potassium is an electrolyte that regulates the heart's conductivity and ability to contract and relax, and potassium deficiency has been linked to increased risk for heart disease and high blood pressure. We could add one more. Since we're talking about electrolytes, I think I should fill in calcium as well, because many of your diuretics for blood pressure also deplete calcium. And so calcium deficiency causes chronic vasospasm, muscle spasms of the arteries. So those arteries they'll cinch up, they'll spasm. That will elevate your blood pressure. So by lowering your blood pressure over a long enough period of time, you can create a scenario where you create nutritional deficiency that actually has a feedback that makes your blood pressure go up. And this is why many of you who've been on a blood pressure medication had your medicine changed from one to another and then combined, and then doctors had to add or stack, right? And that's because of this. This is happening over the years. This doesn't happen overnight. You don't take a pill one day and all this happens the next day. This happens slowly over time. That's why it's insidious, and that's why I want you to know about it, and that's why I want you to be able to go have a conversation with your doctor about it, because it's insidious. By the time this has all started to happen and your blood pressure is now out of control, you're not even thinking about this. Your doctor's just thinking about what other medicine he can use to control this, because apparently you're doing something wrong with your diet. Like, that's usually the way that internal conversation goes. Now, one other note here is that vitamin B1 deficiency causes something called beriberi. Beriberi is pellagra, and it affects the heart. It's actually a form of congestive heart failure. There's a study done about 12, 15 years ago where researchers went into the hospital and they investigated all the people with congestive heart failure, and what they found is that the vast majority of them were on blood pressure medications, particularly diuretics that depleted their B1, and when they corrected their B1, their congestive heart failure improved. So very, very important. Why am I teaching you all this? Because if you're on these medicines, then the least amount that should be done is that you should ask your doctor to check your levels of these nutrients to make sure that the medicine you're taking isn't depleting the nutrient, because it's very, very easy to supplement, and I would even argue that it's very, very easy to exercise and change your diet so that you don't even need the blood pressure medication. But again, this is one of those scenarios. You don't just want to quit your medication, and I don't condone that. I mean, you really should have an honest and open conversation with your prescribing doctor to address this, you know, and to be comprehensive about your approach and what you're trying to do. So again, if you're taking medications, know the long-term consequences of nutritional deficiency that can contribute to heart disease. But again, remember, why are we taking the medicine? To reduce your risk of heart disease. Do you see what I'm talking about, folks? It's kind of a paradox, if you will, is that the medicine's supposed to reduce the risk, but it actually increases the risk, but it just increases the risk in a different way. So what we don't know, because nobody's studied it, nobody's researched it, is if you added all these things to your repertoire, would you live longer? Would you have an even lower risk? Nobody's really studied adding nutritional supplementation into people who are already taking blood pressure medication and compared the outcomes to people who are just taking the blood pressure medication, or compared the outcomes to people who are just changing their diet. Now, we have done the diet studies, and the number one factor that lowers blood pressure, hands down, is diet and exercise. And I know that sounds, again, I just said that that's what doctors say, but what does that mean, diet and exercise? The number one factor in diet is to eat a diet high in magnesium and potassium and low in salt, processed salt. So don't eat processed food, and you can actually reduce your blood pressure by not eating processed food. Eat real food. It's there are over 30 years of research that confirm, those are called the DASH studies, the dietary approaches to stop hypertension studies, that confirm that if you quit eating processed food and eat foods rich in potassium and magnesium, you'll actually lower your blood pressure. Okay, so that's the big thing. And then as far as exercise is concerned, the number one priority is just movement. I mean, how many of you actually take 10,000 steps a day? I mean, many of you that are, you're confined to a desk, you're confined to, a sedentary lifestyle through your work. And so it's important to understand that you have to have some type of exercise within the course of your day to basically to overcome the quantity of sedentary lifestyle that you have. So you've got to mix in exercise, and exercise, it can be generic, but weightlifting, it can be yoga, it can be Pilates, it can be I like to do high-intensity interval training. Not everybody stacks up and can do high-intensity interval training. Some people prefer yoga. So again, listen to your body when it comes to exercise, but exercise. And that's the important takeaway. So here, again, we have blood pressure medicines. We got cholesterol medications. The two primary drivers to treat and reduce the risk for developing heart disease actually contribute to risk factors that can cause heart disease. Therein lies the problem, because since we've been lowering blood pressure and lowering cholesterol, we don't have less deaths from heart disease. Empirically, we have more deaths from heart disease. We could argue that, as we move through as we move through time, we've got more deaths, not less. So throwing medicine at it is not a solution that's meaningful, because it doesn't address the underlying core reason, and the underlying core reason for most people's inflammation. So before I get to questions, one other thing I want to address. So some lab tests. Aside from testing nutritional status, there's some very helpful lab tests that can help assess the risk that you have and assess your progress. So like as you're making diet and lifestyle changes, some of these markers are helpful to track over time, because if they improve, you know that what you're doing is actually working. And one of them is called CRP, C-reactive protein, and specifically high sensitivity CRP. That HS stands for high sensitivity. This is more specific for heart disease inflammation than just a standard CRP. So this one measures inflammation, kind of get a baseline, and then if your level is high, and as you're making diet and lifestyle changes, if your level starts to drop, know that, going back to what I said earlier, here's your blood vessel, what's creating the inflammation. CRP is a measure of that inflammation. And so this helps us to understand whether or not that's going down based on behavioral change. So it's important to know if we're moving the needle on that marker. There's another lab test called homocysteine. This is a very important one because homocysteine can also cause inflammation. Homocysteine it's an amino acid metabolite or byproduct, and it damages blood vessels, it damages brain tissue, it damages the heart, and it's caused by B vitamin deficiency, particularly B12, folate, and vitamin B6, but also vitamin B2 and also an amino acid called methionine. Any one of these deficiencies or deficits can lead to elevations in homocysteine, which can cause vascular inflammation, triggering heart disease. So it's important, again, going back to what I was saying earlier, your doctor can measure, this is a very common test, it can measure homocysteine levels, and again, it's an indirect marker for whether or not you have a deficit in these particular B vitamins and amino acids. Another marker that can be very, very helpful to monitor is your insulin and your hemoglobin A1C. And these help understand about your blood sugar. Because your blood sugar, if your blood sugar levels are high, it's going to increase your blood pressure. Sugar causes something called glycation. Scientific word. Basically what sugar does is it inflames the proteins in your bloodstream. And when you have inflamed proteins in your bloodstream, your blood gets sticky. It gets thick like syrup. And your heart has to work harder and your blood vessels have to work harder. So monitoring blood sugar and how well you regulate it through insulin and through hemoglobin A1C can be very important. Oh, and by the way, this marker should be under 3. This should be under 9. Your hemoglobin A1C should be 5 or less. And then I'm talking ideal. And your insulin should be 5, around 5. And some of the labs today are saying that fasting insulin is okay if it's 20 or 25. That's ridiculous. Healthy fasting insulin is around 5. 3 to 5 is ideal. So these are real simple things. Even your insurance will cover this. So if you're not seeing a functional medicine doctor, if you're seeing a traditional doctor, even your insurance will cover these things. And this will give you some tools at a baseline. Before you implement diet and lifestyle change, get your baseline, then implement diet and lifestyle change and have these things monitored. And as long as they're improving, you know that the decisions that you're making are moving you in the right direction. So those are some lab tests that you can do as solutions or as creating baselines to help you with the solution. And then next let's talk a little bit about vitamins and minerals and nutrients that I believe, and in my experience, are absolutely critical to help your heart and your cardiovascular system function to its optimal. I mentioned earlier B12, B6, and folate, and the reason why these 3 is because they keep homocysteine in a normal range. So these 3 are absolutely critical and important to make sure that you're getting enough of in order to reduce your risk of developing heart disease. So I'm going to put a little star here by those 3. One of the other big ones is magnesium. Magnesium is natural muscle relaxer. So a lot of times high blood pressure is when your muscles are too tense. Your blood vessels are muscles. And magnesium can help naturally relax them. Now, magnesium is also, it inhibits platelet aggregation, so it prevents your platelets from being too sticky and clumpy. And so very, very critical nutrient for cardiovascular function. One of the other things magnesium does is it regulates blood sugar by allowing your body to take sugar, glucose, and convert it, break it down into energy. And if you're not doing that very well because you have a magnesium deficiency, your blood sugar levels can go up. Magnesium deficiency affects blood sugar, it affects viscosity, it affects blood viscosity, and it affects the tonicity of your cardiovascular system, including your blood vessels and your heart. So very, very important nutrient. Another one, and this one's not very well talked about, a lot of people just kind of ignore this one, is L-carnitine. Carnitine transports fat. And a lot of you are on a ketogenic diet, and this is one of the reasons why I'm bringing this up. If you're on a ketogenic diet, it's very common that ketogenic diets can put a stress on your carnitine level. It's because carnitine is like the taxi cab for fat. It shuttles fat into your mitochondria where it can be burned as energy. And understand that your heart uses a lot of carnitine because your heart uses a lot of fat for energy because it never quits beating. It's not like your other muscles, your skeletal muscles, they get to rest. You get to go to bed and they get to rest, but your heart never shuts down, not unless you got a big problem. And L-carnitine is one of the reasons that can happen because L-carnitine transports the fat to have perpetual energy for your heart to be able to continue to beat. And so L-carnitine deficiency is a major, major contributing factor to many, many forms of heart disease. I also mentioned vitamin B1. Vitamin B1, I said earlier that vitamin B1 deficiency causes a heart disease called beriberi. And beriberi of the heart looks like congestive heart failure. So basically a form of heart disease. Now, why does this happen? Vitamin B1 is necessary to produce a neurotransmitter called acetylcholine. This acetylcholine neurotransmitter, basically it helps your heart. Your heart's an electrical organ, and so it feeds the message neurologically to your heart and teaches it how to beat and how to stay in rhythm. So acetylcholine, to make it, you require vitamin B1, and without it, it's very, very challenging and very difficult to do that. So vitamin B1 deficiency is a very big problem associated with heart disease. Now, some of the other things I talked about too, and I'm going to go ahead and just put them up here, but potassium and calcium are very critical to you. Not only can you measure these, but you can also supplement with these or alter your diet to include more of these. I'd say these three, again, long-term studies show these three have the largest impact on high blood pressure, bringing blood pressure down into the normal range. Now, another nutrient is vitamin D. And vitamin D directly is linked to heart disease. So vitamin D deficiency, we know directly can contribute to heart disease. And then another nutrient that's very, very critical, natural solution, one of my favorite go-tos. I've yet to find a go-to that's more powerful than vitamin C for more things. Vitamin C is so powerful in so many different ways. But vitamin C, one of the things it helps to do is it helps support resolution of inflammation. Very, very critical in that regard. But vitamin C, and because most people are living very, very stressful lives, they're burning through vitamin C and their diet just doesn't provide enough. 3 to 5 grams a day is a great place to start for vitamin C, just for good nutritional support, especially if you're under a lot of stress. One of the things that and everybody will yell at me if I leave it off, is your essential fatty acids. Your omega-3 fatty acids predominantly, very critical, very important for regulating inflammation. Play a major role in regulating the inflammation. So omega-3 is very, very important. Another one is vitamin E. Vitamin E helps with the blood thickness. So vitamin E helps the blood stay thin. One of the other medications doctors will use in people that have had a stroke or a heart attack are blood thinners, and understand that several of the things on this list can actually thin your blood. Vitamin E naturally thins your blood. Omega-3 naturally thins your blood. Magnesium naturally thins your blood. Vitamin C naturally thins your blood. So why would we want to take a chemical, is like a cumin and a warfarin, for example, which were derivatives of rat poison? Why would we want to take a known poison, and then the doctor says, take this to thin your blood, and don't eat greens, because greens contain vitamin K, and what warfarin and cumin do is they block vitamin K. That's how they work, and vitamin K helps you clot. So what they're trying to do is make sure that you don't clot. by giving you a poison and telling you not to eat greens. Well, I just told you that one of the best ways to control your blood pressure is to eat greens. That's where we get the potassium and the magnesium. So the advice, it doesn't add up long term. It doesn't make sense to take a poison for the rest of your life and avoid eating greens for the rest of your life if you have heart disease. So, okay, again, these are natural solutions. Now, on the exercise front, so these are different nutrients that I find are absolutely critical, that you definitely can have your doctor test, and you can supplement with them, and they can go a long way in helping support you. But the other big critical factor is the diet, and I want to talk just a minute about gluten. A lot of research has linked gluten, well, we'll just draw it, we already wrote it, to heart disease. And gluten directly, because one of the things that gluten exposure can cause directly is it can cause inflammation. And there have been a number of studies, particularly in the area. So if you struggle with this right here, pericarditis, this has now been identified as autoimmune, and its most common culprit, in my experience, is gluten exposure. So if you've been diagnosed with pericarditis and you haven't ruled out gluten as a reason, and I've seen a number of people come to see me and they've had multiple episodes of pericarditis of unknown origin, is what they were told. But when we got gluten out of their diets, guess what happened to the heart inflammation? It completely went away. So if you've been diagnosed here, you definitely want to look for gluten. Now, if you're going to test for gluten, what do you test? You test genetic markers only. Don't waste your time on blood tests for celiac disease. You'll get a false negative and you'll go on falsely eating gluten, and that'll create a persistence in your problem. So if you're going to test accurately for gluten sensitivity, make sure that you're asking for the genetic markers. If your doctor won't run it, go visit Gluten-Free Society. There's a tab at the top that says genetic testing. You can learn all about it. You can actually order the genetic test kits and get tested to see whether or not you need to confirm whether this is part of your problem or it isn't part of your problem. But diet change, in my opinion, nutritionally, one of the biggest natural solutions I can give you. As I said earlier, William Davis wrote an entire book. He's a cardiologist, wrote an entire book on this topic related to heart disease. And the reason why he wrote an entire book on it is because it's that important. It's, I would say, arguably the number one factor in all this is the diet change. It's getting the poison, toxic grains out of your diet. I wrote a book called No Grain, No Pain. By the way, if you haven't read it, and part of pain, itis, is inflammation, which causes pain. And I don't care whether you're in physical pain, whether your heart is in pain, whether your high blood pressure is a form of pain. It's just not perceived as physical pain, but it is a chemical, biochemical pain, a pain in your health, right? So No Grain, No Pain goes through the depths of why the inflammation process happens when people are exposed to gluten if they have genetic markers or gluten sensitivity. So all that being said, I think I've covered enough. We covered a lot tonight. Let's dive in now and see some of the questions that are coming in. Okay, let's see here. So it looks like I asked a question earlier. Lots of you were saying no, your doctor prescribed a statin but never talked to you about CoQ10. Some of you are saying yes, but far more no's than yeses. And that rings true to my ears. Okay, let's see here. With AFib, so Elizabeth is asking about AFib. You know, my experience in people that have had persistent AFib, it's usually a couple different things. Number one, I see a lot of people when they go gluten-free, if they've been diagnosed in the past with AFib, their AFib goes away. So that would be one thing I would absolutely look into is gluten sensitivity. One of the other things, though, is electrolyte disturbances. Magnesium, potassium, calcium, and salt, sodium, and chloride too. But these three are the big dietary ones that many times people are deficient in. Remember what these are. These are electrolytes. They help the heart properly beat. So they help kind of keep the heart in sync. And so without them, the nervous system in the heart can spasm. Basically, it can get off. How restrictive should you be with salt if you have congestive heart failure? Look, I'm not a fan of salt restriction. Let me be very clear. I don't believe in restricting salt as much as I believe in restricting processed food. There are different kinds of salt. So when we're talking about processed food, we're talking about predominantly monosodium glutamate, or MSG, which is a form of salt that adds flavor to the food, but it's very, very toxic and very, very bad for people. So I would say avoid any form of MSG. But if we're talking about natural sea salt or natural like rock salt, pink salt, Himalayan salt, you don't necessarily need to restrict it. One of the problems in people that have had long-standing high blood pressure, I erased it already, is that those medicines cause a zinc deficiency, and you need zinc to taste and smell. So what happens in people with long-term blood pressure medicines is they lose their ability to taste and smell. And so then they want to salt their foods more and more and more because they can't taste, right? So that's part of the conundrum. You can oversalt if you've lost your ability to taste and smell. Simple test that you can do is you can take 75 to 100 milligrams of zinc for several weeks, and if your taste starts to improve and your smell starts to improve, you might notice you want to use less salt. Okay. Juju says, I take phytosterols for cholesterol. What are your thoughts on this? Look, I'm not a fan of trying to lower cholesterol. You know, cholesterol, there are many reasons why cholesterol goes up. And none of them are because your body wants to cause heart disease for you. Generally, why does cholesterol go up? Well, cholesterol will elevate. You know, understand that we don't have time to get into the full depths of cholesterol, but cholesterol won a Nobel Prize. Bad cholesterol is necessary to form brain synapses. You need bad cholesterol to form brain synapses so that your brain cells can communicate. That's why I'm not a big fan of lowering it. Because when doctors measure it, first of all, you can measure it from day to day to day to day and get massive differences, 20-point, 30-point differences. Most people don't measure it from day to day to day to day. They measure it once every 6 months, and if it's generally high, they get generally medicated. And I'm not a big fan of that. Including plant sterols. The question at hand is not, should we lower cholesterol? The question at hand is, what are we doing about the inflammation? Because cholesterol is just the innocent bystander. The inflammation is the true cause. And so if you're going after cholesterol, even with natural agents, it's what we call green medicine. You're still masking the symptoms in hope to try to have an outcome that's positive, but you're not addressing the origin of the problem. And in the case of heart disease, the origin of the problem is inflammation. Amanda said, my husband lost 22 pounds and no longer has high blood pressure. That's right, weight loss. The number one way to lower blood pressure is to reduce the quantity of blood volume that your heart has to pound through your fat, and that comes with weight loss. Let's see here. Would I recommend nutritional yeast? Not if you have a yeast overgrowth. Does yeast provide B vitamins? Yes, it does, but so do vegetables, and so do lots of other foods. So yeast is not one of those that I see as a necessity in order to receive your B vitamins. A lot of people will use yeast as a B vitamin enhancer, but again, not necessarily the best source of B vitamins. Lynn wants to know, what about aspirin when on statins and having stents after having a heart attack? Good question, Lynn. Aspirin thins the blood. It does. But aspirin also causes leaky gut. As a matter of fact, there are a couple of videos I put together on how aspirin actually causes intestinal permeability and causes erosion to the stomach, even at baby aspirin doses. As a matter of fact, 1/10 of a baby aspirin can cause a gastric erosion. So it's a risk benefit. It's a risk benefit thing. If you're taking aspirin to reduce your risk, then I would start asking your doctor. My advice would be, ask your doctor to measure your clotting, like measure your prothrombin time, how long your INR, how long is it taking your blood to clot, and getting a baseline and measuring the viscosity of the blood, because again, omega-3s, vitamin E, magnesium, vitamin C, and even other things like ginkgo. There are a number of different things, herbal, that can thin the blood naturally without having to take something that can also do damage. Because with aspirin, there's a trade-off. Yes, it thins the blood, but it also damages the gut. And if heart disease is autoimmune, and one of the triggers of autoimmune is a leaky gut, and you're taking a drug that induces a leaky gut, you have to ask the question. You have to inject and ask the question, where does it end? Because what pill or what medicine am I going to be prescribed next? Okay. Natural food sources for magnesium: vegetables, omega oils, cold water fish. Those are the big ones. Sodium potassium ratio more important than limiting sodium. No, and I'm not a fan of diving in specifically to an exact ratio as much as I am making sure that you're not over consuming sodium chloride and that you're getting adequate quantities of sodium and potassium in. What do you think about nitric oxide supplements with arginine or beetroot powder? So nitric oxide is great. It's a natural substance. You can eat beets if you really want to get nitric oxide. You can also eat foods that are high in the amino acid arginine. Arginine, and this won a Nobel Prize in medicine too, is arginine was discovered to produce nitric oxide or be a precursor to nitric oxide. Nitric oxide vasodilates your blood vessels, so it helps your blood vessels open up and dilate, and that's why it's effective. I mean, yes, you can take supplements, and some people, when they have high blood pressure, if they have high blood pressure because they're overweight, sometimes what people will do is opt to use a supplement to get their blood pressure down as they're beginning their exercise regimen and changing their diet. And so again, you can use supplements in that way. What I don't recommend is taking a supplement to lower your blood pressure without taking action like exercise and diet change to keep your blood pressure down, because again, using a supplement to artificially manipulate a number is no different than using a drug to artificially manipulate a number if you're not seeking why the underlying reason the disease exists is there. So yeah, okay. So Barb says, I'm confused about nitric oxide. This question may, well, I'll answer it. So because it produces peroxynitrates, and that's bad for the endothelial lining. So nitric oxide can produce peroxynitrates if you don't have adequate antioxidant function. So part of, if you're going to take a bunch of arginine, you should have good antioxidant function. Now, where do we get good antioxidants from? We get good antioxidants from fresh fruits, vegetables, and real food. You can also supplement with antioxidants, but again, the absolute best source to get your antioxidants is through vividly colored fruits and vegetables, because that's where all those photopigments and antioxidants live. A lot of them live there. Now, some would argue there are antioxidants in green teas and other places, and I would agree with that. There's a lot of different foods. Every time we dig deeper into different real foods, we find more and more antioxidant mechanisms at play, and those are all those can all be very, very helpful. But the bottom line is, if you're eating real healthy and whole foods that you're not allergic to, and if you're gluten sensitive, obviously avoiding the gluten, that's where it's at. Okay, Maria wants to know, is it beneficial to incorporate animal fats such as bacon to the diet? Look, it is. It can be. I mean, animal fats are just as healthy. We need saturated fat. A lot of doctors and cardiologists would roll over and roll their eyes at all of us if they heard us saying that. But you need saturated fat. Saturated fat's a very important part, and it's an essential fat that we need. Bacon may not be the best source simply because bacon fat, if we're talking about a healthier variety of fat, if the pork is free-range organic, that would be a better option. When we're talking about animal fats, where the research is on animal fat causing heart disease is when the animal is mass produced on a mass production farm. So where the animal is being pumped full of grain and pumped full of hormones, not allowed to exercise, so that the animal's meat will marbleize and collect more fat, so that fat shows up as a good taste or a good flavor in the meat. So we're not talking about those kinds of meats. We're talking about free-range organic, grass-fed meats as being appropriate types of animal fat. Let's see. What dose recommendations do you suggest on the vitamins or nutrients you mentioned? It depends, Dickerson. It depends on a lot of different factors. It depends on the age. It depends on the size of a person, the weight of a person. So I don't want to just give generic dosing recommendations. Why not take Viagra for high blood pressure? Is that a joke, John? I mean, you can. You can take Viagra, but again, you're not doing yourself any favors. Is the ratio of omega-3 to 6 at 1:1? Actually, it's really 1:2, so 2:1. So 6 to 3, 2:1 ratio. Some would argue 1:1, but where I like to get people, I like to really get people around a 2:2 ratio. Ideally, in my experience, that seems to be the ratio that is kind of a magic spot, and not making their blood too thin where their noses aren't bleeding from so much omega-3. Let's see here. Oh, like Angie says, MD means murderous dictator. I didn't say it, Angie did. Dispensing drugs to promote illness for profit. Oh, ouch. Regina, thank you, Dr. Osborne. Great info. Hey, Regina, you're welcome. Regina from South America chiming in from down south. Angie chimes in with glyphosate. Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt that glyphosate is a contributing factor in many of our foods today. But heart disease existed before glyphosate, so I think we can't just blame everything on glyphosate, although I definitely agree with you, Angie. It's a big, big factor. Cindy wants to know how much Coke you tend to take on 5 milligrams of statin. You know, again, Cindy, the best thing to do is test. Ask your doctor to test your levels, but a safe bet for statin, like or for a CoQ10, is anywhere between 2 and 400 milligrams of CoQ10 is an excellent way to support that. Can hyperthyroidism lead to or mimic symptoms of heart disease? Yeah, it can. You know, hyperthyroidism will overwork your heart. It will push your blood pressure up, and it will overwork your heart. So it's definitely, I mean, if you've got high blood pressure or heart problems and your doctor hasn't checked your thyroid, it's a smart thing to ask him to check. Okay. Let's see here. So it looks like Deandra is asking about info on antiplatelet medicines. You know, I'm not a fan of medicine to deal with these types of issues. You mentioned that you're eating quinoa, lentils, and potatoes. Look, if you're gluten sensitive, understand that, you know, and this may become a shocker to a lot of you, but quinoa can mimic gluten. There are a number of studies that have shown that the proteins in quinoa look close enough to gluten that it can incite an inflammatory reaction. So quinoa as a gluten-free food is something I recommend people to avoid. Lentils and potatoes are super high in carbohydrates. So if you're using them as staple foods, you could be driving up, I had it on the board earlier, you could be driving up insulin and hemoglobin A1C and increasing the risk of heart disease through elevations in blood sugar. So you got to be careful in that regard too. Okay, there's just no way I'm going to get through all these questions. You guys are awesome. Thank you so much for your participation. We'll do our best to answer as many after the show, but we're just about out of time. So last minute announcement here. Again, we are in the process just right now. This is a special announcement of getting ready to update with a brand new redesign on Gluten Free Society. So if you haven't been over to Gluten Free Society, make sure you come pay us a visit. And if you're entertaining the gluten-free diet and you're wondering whether or not it's the right move for you, then sign up for our newsletter. It's the world's largest newsletter on gluten sensitivity. But we'll send you a free kit, a gluten-free survival guide, if you will. We'll send that to you when you sign up for our newsletter, just to help you navigate the diet a little bit easier. But I want you to go over there and subscribe and visit there. And if you haven't read No Grain, No Pain, if you're struggling with heart disease and you haven't read No Grain, No Pain and taken the 30-day challenge, look, I highly encourage any of you watching this show to do the 30-day No Grain, No Pain challenge. And I would be very, very surprised if you didn't see weight loss, and if you were struggling with blood pressure issues, if you didn't see your blood pressure drop as a result of your weight loss dropping. And if you struggled with cardiovascular inflammation, I would be very, very surprised if you didn't see some of those markers reducing, like your C-reactive protein, your homocysteine. I've seen it in countless people over the last 20 years in practice. And so take that challenge. It's very, very simple. You can go over to Amazon, you can go to any major bookstore and pick up a copy of No Grain, No Pain. And all you have to do is dedicate 30 days to better heart health. This is Dr. Osborne. Make sure you subscribe if you're not already, or like the page if you haven't already, so that you can get updated each time we go live. I go live every Monday, and you can pick Dr. Osborne's brain every Monday, 6 p.m. We'll see you next Monday for another show. Have a great evening.